Hello, everyone. I am Christine Gritman, the host of Let's Talk About Brand. I do this show every single Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time, or whatever time it is where you are, talking with special guest experts about different elements of building your brand, especially your personal brand. So I also want to mention that every week on Tuesday, I also have a companion Twitter chat called Chat About Brand. They're on the same topic as each other every week. So this past Tuesday on Twitter at 12 noon Eastern, we did Chat About Brand, all about branding with podcasts. That can mean hosting a podcast. That can mean using guest appearances on other people's podcasts to grow your personal brand and establish your authority. And the Tuesday Twitter chat always feeds into our Friday interview show right here. And we're going to be talking to our special guest, Melanie Benson. Melanie Benson is a coach who helps people maximize their visibility and their authority, especially. She is the authority amplifier. She is a podcast host. In fact, her podcast is in the top 1% of entrepreneurial podcasts. And Melanie is also frequently a guest on other people's podcasts and shows like this one. I was a guest on Melanie's podcast back in December. I will link to that in the comments for sure if you haven't seen it already. And today we have Melanie here with us to talk about how she has used podcasting, both doing it herself and appearing on others, to amplify her own authority. Without any further ado, hello, Melanie. How are you?
Hello. I'm so excited to be with you, and I love talking about the power of podcasts, so ready to jam on it whenever.
Absolutely. And you know that I love guesting on podcasts and live streams and all of these things. It is such an incredible way to just get in more people's heads as being the authority on whatever it is that you are talking about. And we have our wonderful friend. We have two Tims here in the audience, by the way. We have my wonderful friend, Tim Sohn, and my wonderful friend, Tim Lewis. We have 2 continents worth of Tims today.
Nice. And my husband's a Tim, so there you go.
Goodness, I love it. And they are both authorities in their respective fields. Tim Sohn is social media and especially lately producing live events. And Tim Lewis is an authority in the self-publishing realm and publishing in general. So part of how they have established themselves is by having their own shows and by appearing on other people's shows. So Melanie, I'd like us to kind of back up a little into your history. At what point did you decide to add a podcast to your strategy for your own personal brand? And did you try other things first? Are there any failed podcasts in your wake? Let's talk about how you came to your own podcast.
I love this. So I've been in business since 2000. And I started my initial big burst was, and my momentum came from speaking at live events. So I did a lot of in-person events for many years. And then I introduced what is known as the CD club. And that was super old school where I would interview somebody every month. We would do a live seminar and then we would drop it into a CD and send it out to all of my community that was in my membership. So about 2009, I think it was, I started looking for other ways to amplify my brand and to be able to expand the reach of my work and be a great lead generator and create community around my work, but not have to travel. I didn't want to be a road warrior anymore. I didn't want to have to be at events all the time. And I really love the connection, but I didn't love, having that kind of schedule. So I started looking around at what could amplify the reach of my message and not have me getting out there on the road all the time. And that's where I started to notice that there was this new trend of audio through podcasting. Now, it was really very rough in the beginning. There was not a lot of great platforms. Basically, in the beginning, you had to hard code everything to get it onto special platforms. And then Apple came and started running with the platform. And about the time that Apple was really growing is when I started my first podcast. So you asked about, is there any failed attempts at podcasting? I wouldn't call it a failed attempt because my podcast it was actually a video podcast before video was popular the way it is today. We didn't have all these great tools, so it was super techy and very expensive to run it. I did it because my friend John Lee Dumas was telling me, like, start a video podcast. Apple Podcast is really looking to get more video, and they'll get behind it. That didn't happen. So I found that it was hard to produce and hard to get people on video at that time, and it didn't feel aligned. It
I'd love
didn't,
to
and
hear
that podcast didn't feel aligned with my brand anymore.
I'd love to just sit for a second with the video podcast situation. So a lot of people will do, a Facebook Live of their podcast recording, or they'll do that on YouTube or something. So you're talking about video podcasts and Apple Podcasts. So there was a movement for
Yes.
Apple to house, I guess not live video, but video.
No, it was restreamed video, and it was clunky. It was hard to consume. We did have it on our blog as well. We had a show page for it, and we did. I think at the time Facebook was allowing us to restream it, but it was just hard. And I know, we were primarily using YouTube, so we were creating it for YouTube and then repurposing it to the podcast.
It seems like a great idea, which is you're creating this piece of rich content. Why not leverage it in as many ways as possible and repurpose it as you're making it? But as you found out, sometimes it's not quite worth the extra work involved. Something that seems like a slam dunk of let's do this once and repurpose it, maybe not so much. So sorry to interrupt. Tell us more about how you came to doing the podcast.
Yeah. So there's a moment, I think, when we are evaluating what am I going to put my time and attention into? Where am I going to invest my team's time and attention? And what's actually getting results? And the podcast was getting a lot of success on YouTube, but for the amount of money and time and energy we put into it and how hard it was for me to get guests to come on video at that time, I just felt like the brand of that podcast was not aligned with the brand that was emerging for me. So I closed that podcast. Big lesson learned there is don't close a podcast per se, but rebrand it and can keep that traction going. And that I took about a year and then went back to the drawing board, and I really looked at, and this is an important piece if you're going to start your own podcast, is who is my real audience? What are they hungry for? And where's the intersection of that and how your podcast could create energy and amplify a message there. So that's how Amplify Your Success, which you can see there, was born. And I knew the other thing I know about podcasting, and Christine, I know you'll love this, is I decided I was going to go into that without a rule book. Like I wasn't going to have a bunch of rules of it's interview only or it's solo episodes. I wanted to do what I felt inspired to do. So I have 3 ways that I create meaningful conversations. One is I do solo episodes, which are sometimes my clients' favorites. I do interviews, and once in a while I do on-air coaching from people in my Amplify Your Authority inner circle.
That is really cool. I love that. And to that end, you do have a membership. So do you do some exclusive bonus episodes just for people in your membership? How did you decide whether to make it gated or public? Did you have a consideration when you're putting the podcast together about whether or not this was going to be exclusive or public facing?
Starting it, I knew it was meant to be a community builder. It was meant to be a brand amplifier. It was meant to be a way to attract people. So how my podcast works, because somebody was asking on Chat About Brand, how do you get your podcast in the top 1.5%? So my podcast kind of moves between 1.5, sometimes it's in the top 5%. It just, everything's very fluid in the podcasting market. But what I found was very important was to recognize that the podcast was meant to be an authority platform for myself and my work. And in that authority platform, the job of the podcast is to spread my name, my brand, my message, and my guest message when I have guests, so that it's an attractor. It is a way to magnetize people in. And one of the ways that it works, and I know we'll unpack this a little bit more, is I go out and guest on other people's podcasts. And because I'm being introduced as the host of Amplify Your Success podcast, people are like, oh, well, let me go check out her podcast. and then they binge my podcast, and that's where they end up oftentimes becoming a client.
That was definitely my next question. So perfect, which is it's sort of a chicken and the egg situation when it comes to you want to use a podcast to build your authority, but you need to build your authority before anyone comes to check out your podcast.
Yeah.
So you obviously have grown it beautifully. As I said in the intro, top 1% of entrepreneurial podcasts. I'm sure you have all sorts of other data and accolades. So how did you go about growing it? And what was the thing that really broke through there? Because we all have a moment where we're sort of plugging along, and then it catches. So how did that process, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so great question. Let me just step back for a minute. You asked about the conscious decision to gate it or not gate it. I made the decision to not do a paid gate into my podcast because I do have a coaching program where people can go and invest in more exclusive training and, the bigger strategies and more personalized guidance. So I wanted my podcast to be accessible to everybody so that I could grow it and make it a high profile, highly accessible learning environment, so to speak.
And that's also, I consider it a real sign of confidence and of professionalism when people aren't afraid to give away value for free,
Mhm.
because you have plenty of value to give. And instead of people saying, why buy the cow when I'm getting milk for free? Instead, they look at it in reality. And the right people will say, if this is what she's doing for free, just imagine what the paid content is like. Just imagine what actually working directly with her is like. So I'm really glad that it has worked out that way for you. So yeah, now let's talk about growth. How did you grow this thing?
Yeah. Well, like everybody who has a podcast will tell you, and this probably the top 0.05% don't experience this, but you have to build momentum with your podcast. And I treat my podcast like a business in itself. And I have an entire strategy of how we promote, market, and fill my podcast. So I was very strategic about three things. One, who gets on my podcast. So I like a blend of what we call celebrity guests and guest experts who really are craving and hungry for visibility. And they have to really tie into my value system, and they have to tie into the brand message. It can't just be any willy-nilly person with some kind of great success story. They really have to kind of fit into, I'm an expert and I want to amplify the reach of my work. I want to make more money, and I want to grow as an influencer. Like that's really the key message that happens on there. And we cover a lot of topics, but I'm not going to necessarily talk about people who are doing stuff that's outside of that brand. And being strategic, especially with the guest experts, meant part of the investment to be on the show is they're willing to share it back inside their communities. And so, what a lot of people discover very quickly is high profile guests almost always do not share the episode. They believe that they are kind of the eye candy, if you will. They're the draw. And I don't find that that actually works super well to building a successful business, podcaster for your business. So I like to once in a while have somebody who's more high profile and celebrity. I like to bring in real guest experts who will do co-create the draw in the episode. And then the second thing that I was very strategic about is joining forces with other podcasters where they're going to cross promote my podcast. So I spoke at a lot of events for podcasters where they got to pitch my podcast, which would create a great surge. I've done a lot to, join forces with other podcasters, and we would like get each other featured in like the top 10 lists and things like that. So there is something very powerful about making sure that people are talking about your podcast. And that's a huge part of the growth. And then the third thing that I do, as I mentioned earlier, is there's a lot that we do. I can't unpack all of it. We've got like a 12-step marketing plan. But the third thing that I do, and I find that it really, really helps, is guesting on other people's podcasts. And I think sometimes we get so micro focused on how do we keep our business going, we forget that there is a lot of value in aligning with other people's audiences. So think about this. Most of the people that you would be on their podcast, they've built a raving fan base of people who love and trust them. And when you join them on their stage, whether it's a show like Let's Talk About Brand, or there is it's a podcast like mine, you are borrowing the influence from the person who's bringing you on their show, and that creates instant rapport, and you're borrowing that credibility, and it's a great way to inspire people to want to come and listen to your podcast. So Christine, I could go on and on about how to build it, but those are 3 of the key strategies. There's a lot of other stuff we do with social, but I'll pass it back to you.
Well, I absolutely love, whoops, I've got another one on there. I meant for this to be the one that's up. Oh, yeah. All right.
I agree, Tim.
Yes. So to that end, I know a lot of people who are fully aware of the value of guesting on other people's podcasts, and especially people who are early on and first trying to build their authority. A lot of times they're wondering how they can get that ball rolling with guesting on other people's podcasts, other people's shows, because again, just like building authority with the podcast, but building the podcast authority is kind of chicken and egg. So is guesting on podcasts to get your name out there. But if your name's not out there yet, how do you get to guest on podcasts? So what are some ways to kind of get rolling with that? Have you always just been approached, or was there a time when you pitched? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. Oh, great question. I've done both. So first of all, there's always a way to build momentum around your brand, whether you're just getting started or you are more sophisticated in business, or maybe you're making a change in direction and you want to build some momentum on your new offerings, or like the pivot you're making in your brand. To kind of go back into the beginning, I was very fortunate to make a life-changing decision to host a local monthly event in Los Angeles. And it became very well known very quickly because we got the right speakers on those stages, and they were a great draw. And so I gained a lot of quick momentum, and those people were so grateful for the opportunity that they would invite me to speak at their events. And that's what got me my initial push. But to continue that momentum, and when podcasting started to kick off, I did get a surge of people saying, "Hey, we now have a podcast. Do you want to come on the show?" Because my message and my brand were very well known in my particular circle of influencers. But I made a brand pivot. And when I made that brand pivot, I had to reignite all of that momentum again. So what I did, and this is what I do with every single client that I'm putting through my Authority Amplifier program, is you have to create a very hot topic that people want to know about, that is aligned with what you offer and the type of clients that you want to learn to attract in. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have magnetized your topic, because here's what's happening. Podcasting is now growing so fast. There are over 2 million active podcasts on the market. Of course, not all of them in your industry, not all of them in my industry, but there's a lot of podcasters. Double-edged sword. 1, there's a lot of noise out there. 2, there's a lot of need for great, valuable guests to come and create content with the hosts. So I'm a huge fan of create something that is so standout, so memorable. It causes you to kind of get to the top of the pack, and people go, "Wow, that's an interesting topic. I want to have that person on my show." Because about 100 podcasters a week pitch me and every other successful podcaster that is out there. Some of them are getting thousands of pitches a week. And if you want your pitch to stand out, and this isn't like a personal relationship where you're doing some kind of a swap or there's a mutual like and trust factor that they're going to invite you into their show, you need to have a great topic, and you need to know how to craft the pitch so that it's going to get you on the show. And Christine, I know you will appreciate this. There is not always a first time out of the gate success round unless you do have a big name or a really compelling topic that's a perfect fit. It takes a little research. It takes some follow-up. You have to kind of have some grit in the game and be willing to try a few times. I had a woman who pitched me 5 times before I finally said,
Wow.
"That's the topic I want." And she was great about it. She was just like, "Hey, I just want to check in. I really loving the podcast. I just listened to this episode this week. I just wanted to circle back to this. I have this topic that's been emerging. Would this be a better fit?" I was like, "Yeah, that's the one."
And it has to click. I love what you're saying about how, I mean, if you are using somebody else's authority and somebody else's audience, you want to make sure that you're bringing value for everyone. And I love what you said about using it to help leverage your rebrand. I myself had a kind of brand evolution August of 2020. So I guest on a lot of stuff generally, and I'm not usually very strategic about it. I just kind of do it. I like it. It's fun. I like talking. And in August 2020, I decided that when I kind of came back from my August kind of vacation mentality, I was relaunching. I'd had a general social media talk show for a while called Social. I decided when I came back in August, I was not doing social. I was doing Let's Talk About Brand. I said, I'm going to be personal branding girl. I'm going to launch this show. I'm going to launch this chat about brand. And I needed to get the word out about it. So this time I was strategic. I reached out to several people who not only had shows, but who I know have my back. And I guested on so much in the 2 weeks before my launch. And it was fantastic because then when I showed up with this new content, with the chat, with the show, people were there because they had heard about it.
Yeah.
But that brings me to another question. And also, I want to let everyone who's watching know that I would love your questions too. So bring them on. We will definitely talk about them. But my question for you next is, so it's great when there's that kind of not official tit for tat, but kind of like when there's other creators, you're having other creators on. But what about people who maybe don't have a show, don't have a podcast, don't have a live stream, don't have something like that, but they do have authority in their field or to some level, or they're trying to build it? What would you say to them about how to show their value without having their own show?
Great question. And I get asked this a lot. My clients who are like, I don't really want to do my own show, but I know I need some kind of authority to really kind of like up my game on getting booked. I think there's a couple things you can do. And again, I always go back to what is aligned for you and where are you going with your brand. There's always something. So I have a client who he works in nonprofit fundraising, really successful, in demand in his industry, but we're like basically upping his game. We're doubling his business this year. And so one of the things we're looking at is getting him on podcasts. And I said, if you don't want to have your own show, what if we create like a small, like a giveaway book or a book that you can sell, and that becomes your authority platform. So having a piece of content or a book, something that's highly valuable, this is where the magnetizing your topic can be really a huge asset in getting you booked. I've had people who don't have their own shows. There's no reciprocity that's going to emerge there. And I don't know them, but they've pitched me with such a strong topic that I know is a great fit for my audience and my audience is hungry for, that I'm like, yeah, sure, come on my show. When I was rebooting my brand, there was a podcast that I really liked about story branding, and the host, Park Howell, he took my pitch and he said, "Hey, I really like what you're about. I like your work, but I don't know where the connection is yet. Tell me another couple of topics that might fit." And so what I did was I went back through and I researched all of the topics he'd been covering with his guests. And then I pitched a new topic about his was about story branding. And I said, as a lot of times the story we use for our brand is dictated by the story we tell ourselves about our value. He's like, bingo, let's do it. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of understanding the show. If you really want to hit a certain show, I got probably at least 5 clients within the first 6 weeks of that episode airing. It really spoke to the audience.
I love that. That is perfect. So how can you Brittany has a yay audience question.
Hey, Brittany.
Yay. Brittany wants to know, she said, I'm curious about Melanie's thoughts on monetizing your show through ads and or sponsors. Do it, don't do it, but follow these rules. And then also merch, is it cool or tacky? I'm going to answer that second one. Merch is awesome. Just do print to order. So don't sit there with like dozens of t-shirts in your back room. But it print to order, there's no harm, no foul. Do merch. It's awesome. It's not tacky. It's fabulous.
Do it right.
Do
See,
it.
this is my merch. Not my merch, but I just got the merch in the mail for being a brand ambassador for them.
In fact, you can go to gritman.com/merch, and everybody should. Hashtag just saying. All right.
I'm going to get that mug.
Yes, but you're going to get one. But monetization, talk about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Everybody needs to monetize their show in some way, shape, or form. You are not doing this as a nonprofit, right? Like there is a lot of investment to do it well. And no, it's not always a lot of investment to do it well, but to do it well and to do it to really get to that top 1%, you're going to make some investment of time and money. I think that you have to think about the show monetization for you. So if you don't have a natural way to move your listeners into being paying clients, or you can't leverage your guests as potential partners or clients, then monetizing your show makes a lot of sense. I get pitched by a lot of people to be sponsors on my show, and I do not accept them unless it is a really great fit. Other podcasters are like, hey, if they're willing to pay me to get spotlighted on my show, that's cool. I think sponsorship is going to grow immensely this year. A lot of people are done with Facebook ads and they're looking for other ways to do ad strategies, which is why I think I'm getting pitched so many times now to sponsor the show. And so I think there is going to be an uptick in the number of great sponsorship win-win opportunities. Ads, to me, and there may be some other ways to do ads, but for me, the idea of investing in ads isn't necessarily for you to monetize, but it's to grow your audience reach. And maybe I didn't understand the question, Brittany, but that is the specific thing I would do is use ad strategy on basically placing ads on other podcasts, doing intro swaps. You can, there's some, Spotify in particular is really great with podcast ads, but there's a whole platform of places that you can go and do ads to grow the listenership for your audience. That would be part of the growth strategy, from my opinion.
I love that. Thank you so much for that perspective. I know that there's a variety of perspectives on that. And it's great that you're at a point also of, listenership, but also of authority, that you have sponsors approaching you. Because I know a lot of people wonder how to get sponsors. And it appears the best possible answer is show up, bring value, establish authority, and they will come, which is great to be in a position of that kind of choice.
And don't be afraid to pitch a vendor that you think could be a good fit. I just saw somebody in my Twitter family who shared that they wanted to get a podcast sponsor, and they reached out to someone like, I don't know if it'll work, and they're like totally on board. So you never know. If you feel there's a good fit, try.
Absolutely. I love that. And Brittany says thank you. So you definitely did answer the question wonderfully. All right, great. So we are going to wrap it up here. But Melanie, please let people know where they can find you, why they can find you. You mentioned your podcast and your membership. Tell us all about those so that everyone can continue getting all that Melanie goodness.
Thanks, Christine. So amplifyyoursuccesspodcast.com is where you can land on the best place to find all the places that Amplify Your Success is aired. Love to share some great episodes with you if you are ready for a new great business podcast. The best place to start with me, if you're interested in amplifying your authority and your reach this year, I put together a 7-step plan. It is my proven framework of how I leverage speaking and being a guest expert and moving into having great leads that come through and enrolling people in 4 and 5 figure packages. It's called 7 Steps to Get Booked, Get Leads, and Get 5-figure clients. And you can find that at melaniebenson.com. Let me make sure I get the right URL. Brand chat, because we made one specifically for your audience.
I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Melanie. It has been fantastic having you on. Thank you again for having me on your show. I'm going to link to that in the comments everywhere that this is posted. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you all.
Whoops. Wrong one. So again, this has been Let's Talk About Brand. I do this show every Friday at 12 noon, and I'm live right now on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So please do tell us if you've joined us live or if you've joined us for the replay and what platform you are joining us on. And make sure to stay tuned every week. The topic is different. And we also have a Twitter chat on the same topic. I'm changing the topic slightly from when I made the graphics for next week's. But next week, we do have the lovely, we have, it was going to be branding for solopreneurs. Now it's actually going to be about brand identity, especially like logos and things like that, brand identity factors. And our guest next Friday is going to be a lovely designer who specializes in brands, and she has the right name for it. We are going to have the wonderful Anna Brand joining us from the UK. And again, change of topic, didn't change the graphic yet. It's not branding for solopreneurs. Next week's topic is brand identity, and we're going to talk about logos and stuff like that as well. So be sure to join us. Thanks very much.